Tim Mumford. He's the head of digital innovation at OPV, and he leads the implementation of VDAS. He's an electrical engineer with an MBA as well as an author. He has a rich and diversified background with project experiences in government infrastructure, oil and gas, mining and management consulting. Please welcome Tim.
Thanks for having me. And I guess I can't underemphasise what Adam said about this being a shift for government collectively. This is a real step change in the way that we've been working, and thanks for your patience, probably the first time. I want to talk about VDAS. You've probably seen elements of this slide before, but what I wanted to emphasise for today was where we're at with VDAS Guidance and give you some teasers about where the development is at and the timing moving forward. I thought I'd break this into sort of three sections, sort of what's our vision, just exactly what Adam mentioned before. We've got a very clear vision and we're all working towards that. What have we done so far in a period of time, and how are we sort of mapping against our KPIs and key success criteria as outlined for our vision, as well as what's next. I apologise about my voice, just come back from China, which, mind you, China is full steam ahead in terms of BIM and digital engineering. They have something like 15,000 projects that they've done as part of the China BIM Union. Now, I'm not saying it's consistent, but I'm saying that they are full steam ahead, like not even waiting for IC, full steam ahead. So what the clear message for me out of the China meeting was that we need to get our collective acts together in terms of moving forward as a country to steer digital engineering and BIM in the right direction, but also for ourselves and being a competitive player in the environment. I want to quickly talk about our vision. What are we working towards? Some of you have seen this before, but essentially it's managing data across the asset lifecycle towards a best practice approach for the benefit of Victorians. That cannot be understated. We are paid for essentially by Victorians, and as part of the act that follows it, pretty much data should be shared back to Victorians. So we've got an implied contract back with the Victorians that whatever we build and whatever we're doing is fully transparent. So this is the basis of what we've established our vision on. We've got three key success criteria that we're working for, and I think you'll agree if we nail three of those, we've done a pretty good job. I think the one for me, which is probably hard to get, but once you get it right, I think the other two fall in line, is number three. Once people perceive the value of data, as Adam said, data is the new oil, and once people perceive the information has value, or data has value and information flows from it, that makes the other two KSCs much more easy to align to. So there's no such thing as a strategy or a policy that is just this island. It's just not feasible. And so often we get, do a mandate. It doesn't quite work like that. And so what I wanted to highlight was there's a lot of moving parts. There's so many moving parts within government. There's federal, there's state, there's councils. Federal don't play nice well with state. State don't play well with councils. Councils don't talk to federal. We have our own policies, and I wanted to highlight some of these. And you can probably sort of guess where they link in. Victorian state budgets, where we've mentioned it. VPSC, VPS values, stuff like transparency, really important. The Asset Management Accountability Framework, which highlights the value of data and essential asset management, of which BIM plugs into, as well as some major state government projects. None of you will be probably unfamiliar with the Fisherman's Bend project, which is the pilot, essentially, for a digital twin for the state. BIM, DE data, asset management data for the state, is a massive component, I can tell you, for that digital twin. So we're moving towards a digital twin, and there's some other major projects which are going on, digital transformation major projects, which plug into VDAS. The AIM project by DOT, as well as VMAPs, I can tell you are nicely progressing, and it's their vision to have VDAS data eventually plug into that as well. So we're part of a pretty broad church, and it's really important that policy around digital engineering and asset management, digital asset management, plugs into those things, because we're guaranteed to fail if we don't. There's also many other moving parts, not only in Australia, but also globally. There is the Fair Data Principles, there's the Gemini Principles from the UK, there's obviously DEF from New South Wales, which have been trailblazers for the last half decade. We've got Queensland. We've also got our peers over the shore. We're not an island. We have to work in and we have to synchronise with these. And there's some really good learnings that we've captured as part of VDAS, and some really good conversations that are happening concurrently as with some of these players. I just want to talk about the Gemini Principles. If anything is going to be working towards a common vision, that is the Gemini Principles. So if you read anything as part of this presentation, I do urge you to have a look at that, as well as the Shergold report. That is basically 23 recommendations, and about half of them BIM can help with. So if you ever need a case to sell within your own organisations, these are two really good ones. So that's the vision, that's what we're kind of heading towards. I think you're aligned with that. What I want to highlight is what have we done, what are we doing right now? As you know, some of you have probably seen this slide before, but we've got three major sort of steps of our statewide strategy, and that's the strategic framework. We've obviously released that. It's a 50-page document. It was released earlier this year. The guidance we're working on, which falls under the strategic framework, which is a detailed description about how to do DE and BIM within the departments and organisations, as well as technical guidance. We're obviously consulting with industry as part of that. There's quite a lot of templates that fall under this, as well as support material, of which we're adding to literally every day. So where are we at with the whole schema, for lack of a better word? We're a fair way through it, as compared to how we said we would back in the start of this year. So we finished the strategic framework. As part of the strategic framework, we went out to about 180 people, collected thousands of comments, some of them not completely in alignment with each other. We've done the VDAS Data Dictionary. We've got access to ISO 19650 for every state government employee. We've done an education map. We're moving on to training. I'll talk about that in a second. And we're delivering guidance. So I'm pretty proud to say we've actually moved pretty quickly in any terms, let alone government terms. And now I want to sort of talk about where we're at with the guidance. So hopefully some of you have seen this slide before, but essentially the reason for this is because there's several different audiences. Adam mentioned that in his key lessons learned that executive sponsorship is so important, and he couldn't be more true. So that's why we've got Part A. You have to get a sponsor within departments and agencies. You have to get executive level support to sell the idea of VDAS and sell the idea of DE and move away from BAU. And the point of Section A is to get to the end of an executive to read it, short, sharp, and say, why haven't we been doing this sooner? Once you get that buy-in, it goes to the organisation. And DE, you can say, go and do DE, go and do BIM, and you can do it on 100 projects and you'll get 100 different outcomes. And they need to all return to centre. They're all doing a part of an investment framework. They all pull information from the organisation, and they all should push back information back to that organisation. There's a home for every project, and that's what Part B is speaking to. So it's talking about asset management, it's talking about asset management standards, it's talking about data and information models, it's talking about decision-making framework for the portfolio. And that's aimed at strategic asset managers, strategic portfolio managers, and strategic facility managers, as well as that executive level team, such as the CIO, CTO, etc., heads of projects. So the purpose of this section is to set up the organisation for a pilot project or for DE to succeed on the project. It's kind of setting up a DEF team within a department or agency itself so that pilots can succeed. Without Part B, you certainly aren't getting Part C right in a consistent fashion. So Part C itself is aimed at doing projects, okay? We've got this idea of moving 10,000 people from the north of the city to the south. How do you do DE on that? How do you go through the project lifecycle, the asset lifecycle, and return all that information with ISO 19650 back to Part B, in line with ISO 55000? Basically what the purpose of Part C is. So I want to talk about some teasers. What have we come to? What have we been nutting out in the last 4 months of? Is we've clearly aligned all those policies, and there's about 10. The key elements of all the policies and acts and legislation that we need to meet as public servants, we've aligned what VDAS can do to help that. And that's really aimed at the executive. It's also aimed at the common public servant to say, you know, boss, we actually need to do this, and this is how we can do it. We've also assigned responsibility to what's called a VDAS champion, and that is someone that sits within the ELT, the Executive Leadership Team, which has accountability for the rollout of digital engineering. Now, historically, you know, it could have been sold that it was the CIO or the CTO. Historically, those roles haven't really stepped up to the idea of DE. And the reason for that is, it's still not quite clear in my mind, but in reality, the CIO is referring to enterprise level sort of information flow. The CTO is kind of talking about the same from a technology point of view. There's no real crossover in terms of projects information and how that correlates then to organisational information and the idea of OIR and AIR and EIRs. It hasn't been there. So we've created the role of the VDAS champion, which sits within that ELT. And in a Victorian public service context, they report to generally the secretary. We've also created a quick start guide for Part A. How do you hit the ground running? How do you set up Part B for success? How do you get Part C on the way? Part B, teasers. We've set up this idea of a change roadmap, which is basically a delta analysis for each department or organisation, understanding where do we want to be, where are we at now, and where do we want to be in a period of time. And you can essentially steal this scope as a department or agency and have someone independent, or you can do it internally, to assess where you are on that maturity roadmap to adopting VDAS or ISO 19650 or whatever your change or maturity model might be. We've linked the many life cycles within public service, so investment life cycle, PPP policy, asset management policy, as well as project life cycles, as well as ISO 19650 integrated, and we've correlated that by procurement model. So historically the issue has been with investment life cycle is that it's an investment life cycle. It's not a project life cycle, and they're two completely different things. So the point of entry into market, the decision-making point for market, in a PPP, and the maturity of the design, the project design, is completely different to that of a constructor-only project. And so having the challenge of linking what information is needed from a DE point of view to an investment life cycle is near impossible unless you've workflowed it out. So we've got something like 5 workflows, ISO 19650 workflows, and VDAS workflows by procurement model. So you can essentially steal it and then use it and adapt it as you need. We've got that process ISO links, so we've established the idea of OIR, AIR, AIM, EIR, and all the documents that follow that, and we've provided templates for every single one of them. And That's a big step because, as far as I know, there is no real OIR template out there, and that is a very hard conversation to have internally. What information do we use? What adds value? Project ready. We've also set up how do you start your first pilot if you're there, or how do you reuse that project that might be doing bits and pieces of DE and put it in a consistent way. So as you can sort of tell, this is putting part B, setting up the organisation for success so that a project itself can succeed. Without getting this right, there's no chance. Part C, this is the actual projects bit, and this is really talking about where sort of ISO kicks in. Now, I guess the thing that we've also learned is ISO and 1192 doesn't talk about the strategic planning bit, which is a big challenge, so we've sort of had to add that in because there's a lot of stuff that goes forward before ISO even really does kick in. We've adopted this sort of approach of firm but flexible. I think what we've gleaned and what we've taken from stakeholders within the public service is that just tell us, just help us out, tell us what you think is right, and we'll take that advice and we'll adjust accordingly if it's not. And so the way that the prose is written within the guidance is someone should be doing this. This is something this is a step that needs to happen right now. It's a staged approach. Obviously, you can see the 7 stages. ISO, as well as 1192, as well as REBA, as well as PMBOK, as well as all these standards, never really captured the full life cycle of a project and the handovers back up to O&M in a granular fashion, which was really handy. So we had to establish this 7. It's loosely linked to 1192 and REBA, as well as ISO. So essentially ISO is now linked with our life cycle as well as all the other life cycles that are out there. It's procurement friendly, as I mentioned. We've tailored it to a procurement approach, which is the way within state government projects. Everyone talks about the procurement method, and that is, for this to succeed, that was the way that we had to move forward. We've taken a lot of lessons learned from abroad, as well as from projects themselves, within state government, as well as private project, as well as interstate, and we've encapsulated that in. We've also engaged a third-party legal firm to basically go out to market the whole supply chain and find out what their legal and commercial premiums are. That was a huge undertaking to understand what are the problems that industry faces around DE and BIM in general. Now, this is not as compared to what are your projects BAU, contractor X, contractor Y, we don't really get along. That's not what we're talking about. And so we've had to respond to every single learning from that within the VDAS guidance. So it's our view that most commercial disputes and legal disputes can be mitigated before the first before commercial award. And we've tried to do that. So we've adapted that response back into the VDAS guidance. Again, ISO ready, we've got EIR, which PIR is moving towards now. They're sort of synonymous, let's be honest. As well as a RACI scope checklist, which really kind of details out what the scope is versus time and what the information is or is needed, as well as whether there's any IP or reservations on information as part of that. But at the heart of it, the RACI scope checklist is really talking about scope, time and responsibility in one conversation before commercial award. And that's the purpose, that's the conversation that we should have always had. And so when I see BIM, I don't see software, I see better conversations earlier, and that's what I hope this is driving towards. We've got the DEEP, we're calling, which is the BIM management plan, which is the response to the EIR essentially, the DEAR, which is the government's response back to everyone else on how that went. All of those have got templates. And we've also done some checklists. This was a nice little addition and recommendation from industry to say, as part of these 7 phases, what are the things that you need to do to make sure that we can agree that this phase is complete and we can move on to the next one. And without having finalised those things, we're kind of not setting up our next phase for success as well. And so they're basically malleable, but they're a full A4 page per phase to say, are we ready to move to the next phase? So that gives you a flavour of where we're at. For consultation for industry is imminent, and you'll essentially know when you've got it in your email. We're looking for a sort of semi-short turnaround, maybe 2 weeks, on high-level commentary. And it's always been my comment that if you want something changed, hold the pen to it. Those of you who know me know that I don't have a very clear, fixed vision for any of this stuff, and I'm not very strong on held to a particular belief. And if industry collectively pushes back on an idea, I strongly welcome that. But this is the time for feedback, and I strongly welcome industry's feedback on that. We've got a short list of about 300 people that we want to send this to. 2-week-ish turnaround. Again, please hold the pen on something rather than just diatribe. We're hoping to release this by the end of the year and have a ministerial launch, but obviously the time of these individuals is very precious, and so we're at the mercy of that. In terms of where we're at versus what we said we would do at the start of this year, we've released the strategic framework. That should be a tick. But the VDAS guidance we're working on, and the technical guides within the next 1 to 2 years. So we're sort of well ahead of progress on that. Maintain collaboration. I think we've done this. We've begun to set up a whole of Big Gov steering committee. NTIA, or the major transport projects, have already set up their own, and I can strongly welcome their progress on that. On DE implementation cross-sector, which is about 80% of the capital spend within the Victorian government. Support for the Victorian Public Service. We've got some really good feedback from within government on what we're doing and how we can help them, and we're already starting to see those conversations mature within the public service, which is fantastic to see. BIM and TAFE courses, which the government's committed to. We've also done the education roadmap. I'm pretty confident that if anyone wanted to upskill in BIM, they could definitely find this. And I know some TAFEs are making some big steps towards releasing syllabus and courses in the next 6 months in Victoria, which is fantastic to see. We'll also broach this conversation about training. That will be a 2020 related discussion for us. More of an awareness thing about VDAS as part of implementation. But then after that, I suspect departments and agencies will start to have their own training courses, which will filter out to the industry, which is fantastic to see. Education Map, done that. And the next 2 to 5 years is all about refresh and implementation, which is going to be fantastic. We've done some really good stuff that we're hoping to do around IFC and working with buildingSMART, as well as other sectors, other state departments and agencies across Australia. Year 5, we're really hoping that BIM integration into digital twin will be pretty cemented by then, and then this will become just business as usual. And as Simon likes to say, it's no longer digital engineering, it's just engineering. So with that, I really thank you for your attention and your support.